Gilgamesh, the king who searched for immortality, Part 1. Look at the wall of Uruk. The poem does not begin in a tomb. It does not begin with a treasure hidden under sand or with a secret formula for eternal life. It begins by asking the listener to look at a wall. Look at its brickwork, the old voice says. Walk around it, inspect the foundation, find the tablet box of copper and read what is written there. This is one of the most quietly powerful openings in ancient literature. The story is going to follow a king who crosses forests, defies divine beings, mourns a friend, travels to the edge of the world, meets the survivor of a primeval flood, and searches for a way not to die. Yet before any of that, the poem directs our eyes toward a human city. The city is Uruk in southern Mesopotamia. Its ruins lie near modern Warqa in Iraq, in the river world between the Tigris and the Euphrates. In the early cities of this landscape, mud brick, canal, reed, temple, palace, and field were bound together by labor and memory. The walls of Uruk were not simply military architecture. In the poem, they become a kind of answer. They are what remains when the body of the king does not. The name of that king is Gilgamesh, or in older Sumerian tradition, Bilgamesh. Mesopotamian tradition remembered him as a king of Uruk, sometimes placed deep in the 3rd millennium BCE. The Sumerian King List gives him an immense reign, as it gives many early rulers immense reigns. Those numbers should not be read as modern chronology. They belong to a literary and ideological way of thinking about kingship, antiquity, and legitimacy. Still, the list matters. It shows us how a figure can stand at the border between memory and myth, not proven to us as a historical person in the way a modern biography would require, but remembered as if a city, a dynasty, and a world had once gathered around his name. Scholars are careful here. No contemporary inscription has yet let us point and say, this is the historical Gilgamesh speaking in his own lifetime. Mesopotamian tradition placed him among early kings, and he was worshipped or treated as divine in ancient tradition surprisingly early. But the Gilgamesh we can actually read is a literary figure preserved in texts copied over many centuries. That is the first caveat and also the first wonder. Gilgamesh survives because scribes copied him. Part 2. Before there was one epic, it is tempting to speak as if there was always a single book called the Epic of Gilgamesh, but the tradition is older and more layered than that. In Sumerian, several separate stories circulated around Bilgamesh. There is Gilgamesh and Akka. There is Gilgamesh and Huwawa, the guardian of the cedar forest. There is Gilgamesh and the bull of heaven. There is Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the netherworld. There is the death of Gilgamesh. These are not simply chapters that dropped neatly into one modern volume. They are separate compositions from an older literary world, copied in scribal schools and reshaped over time. Later, in Akkadian, Old Babylonian fragments show the stories taking on new form. Then, in the 1st millennium BCE, the standard Babylonian version, often known by its opening phrase, "He who saw the deep," gathered older traditions into a powerful architecture. This version is traditionally associated with the learned scribe Sin-legi-unnini. The surviving manuscripts are incomplete, spread across many tablets and centuries, with important copies from places such as the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. This history of transmission matters because it keeps us from flattening the poem into a single ancient movie plot. Gilgamesh is not one moment. Gilgamesh is a tradition. It passed through Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian scribal worlds. It traveled through schools and libraries. It was known beyond southern Mesopotamia, with adaptations and fragments moving through the wider international culture of the late Bronze Age and after. The story that reached us is therefore already a kind of archaeology. It is made of layers. Part 3. A king who is too much. In the standard Babylonian story, Gilgamesh is introduced as extraordinary. He is strong, beautiful, restless, and more than ordinary human. Often he is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. That formula is mythic, not anatomical. It tells us that this king belongs partly to the world of gods and partly to the world of dust, but extraordinary power has made him dangerous. The people of Uruk cry out, their king does not sleep calmly within human limits. He overwhelms the young men, he takes what should not be taken, he exhausts the city that should have been protected by him. This is important. The poem does not begin by worshipping power, it begins by showing power out of balance. The gods answer by creating Enkidu. Enkidu is first imagined outside the city, in the open steppe, living with animals, drinking at watering places, covered in hair, strong and untamed. He is not a simple savage, and the poem is not a modern anthropology. He is a literary counterweight. If Gilgamesh is excessive civilization, Enkidu is excessive wildness. The movement of the story brings them together. The civilizing of Enkidu is one of the most famous and most difficult parts of the tradition. It involves sexuality, food, clothing, speech, and entry into human society. In a calm retelling, we do not need to sensationalize it. What matters for the larger story is that Enkidu becomes human in relation to others. He leaves the animals, he learns bread and beer, he enters the city, and when he meets Gilgamesh, he does not simply become the king's servant, he resists him. Their struggle becomes friendship. That friendship changes the shape of the king. For a time, Gilgamesh's energy turns outward. The two men become companions in adventure, and the poem seems to enter the heroic mode: roads, weapons, gates, monsters, fame. But the deepest theme has already appeared. Gilgamesh has met the person whose death will teach him that he is human. Part 4. Fame Before Death. In the older Sumerian story of Gilgamesh and Humbaba, the motive is stated with striking clarity. No one can pass beyond life's final end. The living will die. Because of that, a hero seeks a name. This is not merely vanity. In many ancient worlds, fame was a kind of survival. If the body goes down into silence, perhaps the name remains in the mouths of people. Perhaps the deed is copied on a tablet. Perhaps the wall still stands. So Gilgamesh and Enkidu travel toward the cedar forest. In later Akkadian tradition, the guardian is often called Humbaba. In Sumerian, Humbaba. The forest is magnificent and frightening, a sacred place, not simply a supply depot for timber. The hero's expedition can be told as courage, but it can also be heard as trespass. They go beyond ordinary boundaries. They confront a guardian appointed by divine authority. They seek glory in the cutting down of what is protected. This ambiguity is part of what makes the poem endure. It does not let heroism remain clean. The victory over Humbaba brings fame. It also brings cost. The heroes return with the aura of success, but the story is tightening around them. Their achievements do not free them from death. They may even draw death nearer. Then comes the bull of heaven. The goddess Ishtar desires Gilgamesh. He rejects her, listing the ruin of her earlier lovers. Insulted, she asks for the bull of heaven, a divine force of destruction. Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill it. Again, the heroes triumph. Again, triumph is not the same as safety. The divine council decides that one of them must die. It is Enkidu. Part 5. When adventure becomes grief. The death of Enkidu changes everything. Before this moment, Gilgamesh could seek fame as if fame were enough. He could face monsters as if danger belonged outside him. He could move through the world as the exceptional man, the king whose strength separates him from ordinary people. Then Enkidu becomes ill. He suffers, he dreams, he curses and blesses. He sees the shadowed house of the dead in terms that echo the bleak ancient imagination of the netherworld. And then he dies. Gilgamesh mourns with a force that feels painfully recognizable across time. He covers his friend. He refuses the fact at first. He calls on craftsmen to make memorials. He speaks of Enkidu as companion, brother, axe at his side, shield before him. But beneath the sorrow is terror. Gilgamesh looks at the body of his friend and sees his own body in advance. This is the hinge of the epic. The genre changes. The adventure story becomes an immortality quest. Gilgamesh leaves the city in wild grief. He no longer seeks fame. He seeks escape. If Enkidu could die, then Gilgamesh can die. If Gilgamesh can die, then being king, strong, beautiful, and partly divine has not solved the oldest problem. The road he takes is strange and symbolic. He passes beyond ordinary human spaces. He comes to scorpion beings at the mountain of the sun. He travels through darkness. He reaches Siduri, the tavern keeper by the edge of the sea, who gives one of the poem's great human answers. Except food, clothing, washing, companionship, the child held by the hand. In some versions and related traditions, this advice is fuller. In the standard Babylonian version, the emphasis shifts, but the theme remains nearby. Human life is not made eternal by refusing ordinary joys. Gilgamesh cannot yet accept that. He crosses the waters of death to find Utnapishtim. Part 6. The Flood Inside the Search. Utnapishtim is the man who survived the Great Flood and was granted a life beyond ordinary human death. In Tablet 11 of the standard Babylonian epic, he tells Gilgamesh the flood story. A famous copy of this tablet, from the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, is now known as the British Museum Flood Tablet. The flood account is one of the most famous parts of Gilgamesh, partly because of its similarities to later biblical flood tradition. In the 19th century, when George Smith read the cuneiform flood story in the British Museum, it caused a sensation. For modern scholarship, the similarities opened large questions about Mesopotamian flood traditions, biblical literature, transmission, and the shared literary world of the ancient Near East. But in this episode, we should remember where the flood sits. It is a story inside a story. Gilgamesh has not come to Utnapishtim because he is writing a comparative flood mythology essay. He has come because he is afraid to die. Utnapishtim's story gives him no simple method. The flood survivor's immortality was an exceptional divine gift after an exceptional catastrophe. It cannot be repeated on demand. To test Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim challenges him to stay awake. The hero who crossed the world cannot even conquer sleep. Sleep becomes a small rehearsal for death. Gilgamesh fails. There is still one last chance, a plant of rejuvenation found in the deep. Gilgamesh obtains it, and for a moment the story seems to open toward hope. He will bring it back. He will test it on an old man. Perhaps youth can be renewed, if not immortality achieved. Then, while he bathes, a snake takes the plant. The image is unforgettable. The final chance slips away into the body of another creature. The snake sheds its skin. Gilgamesh does not. Part 7. Return to the wall. At the end, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk. This return is not a failure in the simple sense. He did not win immortality. He did not bring back the plant. He did not undo Enkidu's death. He did not become Utnapishtim, but he has seen the deep. He has learned the shape of the limit, and so the poem returns our eyes to the city. Look at the wall. In that gesture, the epic gives one of its most mature answers to mortality. Human beings do not become eternal by pretending not to die. They build, remember, mourn, teach, copy, and hand down. A wall is not a body. A tablet is not a life. A city can fall. A language can be forgotten. Even cuneiform itself disappeared from living use for many centuries. And yet here we are, still speaking the name Gilgamesh. That survival is not the immortality he wanted. It is stranger and more fragile. A possible early king became a legendary hero. A legendary hero became a school text. A school text became broken tablets in buried libraries. Broken tablets became museum objects. Museum objects became translations. Translations became the modern story of a king who could not escape death. This is where myth and history overlap most quietly. Not in proving that every monster was literal, not in turning ancient poetry into lost technology or secret history. not enforcing the Sumerian King List to behave like a modern date chart. The overlap is in cultural memory itself, the way cities remember rulers, scribes reshape heroes, and stories preserve truths that facts alone cannot hold. Gilgamesh searched for immortality and returned with something more human. He returned with grief. He returned with knowledge. He returned to the city whose wall could still be touched. The old voice asks us to walk around it, and for a moment, across 4,000 years of broken clay and human longing, we do.